From Minneapolis, Minnesota, welcome to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.
Welcome to Theater Begins Here, a podcast for our Playwright Center members. I'm Joyce, Director of Membership Programs, and this is
Alayna, Jacqueline, Membership Programs Manager. And as Hannah said, we are the membership team that supports our 2,400 plus Playwright members around the world. So let's get started with some upcoming classes and seminars. We have an online seminar called Theater Law 101 that's taught by John Guerin, and that is on Monday, May 15th. We then have an online workshop that's called Self-Producing for Theater, taught by today's guest, Olivia Lilley, and that will be on Tuesdays, May 16th through June 20th. And then finally, after that, we have an online seminar called Short Playwriting, and that's taught by affiliated writer Kristen Eve Cato. All of these seminars and classes are from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Central Time. All right, let's get started by introducing our guest artist today, Olivia Lilley. Olivia Lilley is a screenwriter, director, theater maker, and producer who came up in Chicago's DIY and storefront theater scenes, as well as downtown New York scene. Olivia is the artistic director of Prop Theater and a board member at the National New Play Network. She was the founding artistic director of the Runways Lab Theater, voted Best New Theater Company in the Chicago Reader's Best of 2014. Olivia's feature screenplay, The Snow People, was selected for Full Spectrum Features Producers Lab 2020. She was selected for Broadway for All's Theater Producers of Color, Commercial Producing 101 inaugural cohort. She has taught at DePaul's Theater School and School of Cinematic Arts, the Playwright Center, Chicago Dramatists, Phoenix Theater, and School for the Blind in Indianapolis. Olivia attended Carnegie Mellon School of Drama for Directing and Interlochen Arts Academy for Music Composition. She has an MFA in Screenwriting from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. She's about to launch a podcast this spring called The Future of Arts in America, a New Models podcast, where she interviews artist producers about the new ways they've been working on this side of the pandemic.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I have such a long-winded bio that crosses into multiple disciplines.
No, I love it.
Great.
It makes sense that you are also a self-producer.
Yeah.
So tell us from the beginning, how did you get into theater?
So my mom originally wanted to be an actor, but she got knocked up while she was in theater school at a Catholic university. She sort of ended up in a very interesting trajectory where she at one point was like a karaoke decoy. So she was a shell in the crowd. So like in the early days of karaoke, she would get up there and like sing and get everybody comfortable before to get and
that is amazing.
And then she ended up working in the fashion industry, but basically my birth kind of set her onto this new path of fashion, and so to get out her theatrical desire, she would dance and sing for me as a baby. And so the language of performance was just always, around me. And I, ended up first being dazzled by musicals. Josephine, the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. High school down the street, came to my grade school and presented a scene from it. And I just remember thinking, I want to make this. And I pretty much, so I was probably 7 or 8. It was pretty much, that's what I cared about from then on.
I want to make this. There it is right there.
I think that it's really funny. It explains a lot that your mom is in fashion, because I feel like you are a very fashionable person.
Aww.
I don't know, I follow you on Instagram and you switch up your headshots a lot. So does Hannah. Hannah, you both are a good headshot switch up type people, but you are always very I feel like very cool in all your photos. That's such a weird way of saying that.
Oh, thank you.
I think that you, like, your style shows through always in your headshots.
Aw.
And various
Well,
pictures.
I feel like when you are like an independent artist, it's really important for you to be intentional about how people see you. And so over the years, like I feel like I've Madonna'd a fair amount in my career, where like, 10 years ago, I was presenting myself a certain way. And now that I'm in my early mid 30s, I'm a kind of making my image a little classier, a little less totally punk, but staying true to my roots. So it's part of, I say like, it's definitely a self-expression element, but it's also a business element. Because, if people don't know how to think about me, they don't necessarily know how to access me. Yeah. So it's hard for me to separate the art and the business. It's like my brain just has melded the two.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're about to get a bunch of new Instagram followers now. Like, let me see, what's her style?
I love Madonna as a verb too. That's awesome. Feels right.
So how did you know you wanted to pursue theater as a profession? When did you like fully commit to this career path?
Well, when I was 12, I read the book, The Phantom of the Opera, and I loved it. I became like just super moved and enthralled by it. And I discovered the musical, and the musical to me, to 12-year-old me, felt very unsatisfactory. And so I started writing my own feminist reimagining of The Phantom of the Opera that was a musical. And so that's how I ended up at Interlochen Arts Academy studying music composition, is because I was like, every day I'd come home from school and I'd work on my musical. Like first it was I'd work on the script all the time. And then I was like, oh, I need to teach myself how to, write music. And so I did. And then I taught myself how to orchestrate, and then I turned it into orchestra music. And then basically one of my friends who also was studying voice at the time, I like showed her my score and she was like, you have to go to Interlochen. Like, what are you doing here? And so that's how I found out about it. And that's how I ended up there. And so as soon as I started that musical, I worked on that for 2 years. And then I was like, let's write a different musical set in a totally different place. And I pretty much have been doing things of that nature ever since. Like in high school, I very much did musicals. And then when I went to Carnegie Mellon to study directing, I discovered experimental theater and plays and other things. And so the forms that I wanted to express myself through just changed a little bit. But I had the same work ethic, pretty much since I was 12. And so that really, it kind of took over my life. And, eventually I learned that there were other things in the world besides plays and shows, but took a while.
This is amazing. What happened to this Phantom of the Opera spinoff?
Musical? Well, so I guess the first thing that happened is I started going to events for young writers, or for writers really. And someone wrote an article about me in my local paper, because I was the only 14-year-old at these screenwriter meetups in my small town. And I got parts of the score performed at Interlochen. So there's recordings of a full choir and these and orchestra playing excerpts. It also I also drew I kind of did a little bit of the design stuff for it. I didn't know what a director was yet, but I did all this stuff to flesh out the world. But luckily that musical's never been put on. I have it bound somewhere in but it was a great learning experience, and it made completing a thing after that not as scary.
This is amazing. I mean, you are basically describing, yourself from 12 to 14, already beginning the path of learning how to create and produce your own work.
Yeah.
I can see all of those. You're like, well, I've got to learn how to do this, and I got to learn how to do this. That's amazing. It's so beautiful.
I recorded lots of demos with people from my high school and also from my church, because
oh my gosh,
I was who around me does things, and I got them to do things.
Amazing. So amazing. So when do you consider, like at what point in your career do you consider I produced my first play? And why did you decide to produce it yourself? And what was it?
So, okay, so this is, so originally when I was like 15, I met someone who was a faculty member at Wright State University, and they have a great musical theater program. So in several years, we were in talks to do a workshop of one of my musicals. At the end of that process, a few years in, it basically just never happened. And I felt very powerless as a writer. I didn't actually have a play produced until I was 20, and other people produced it. My first two productions were produced by other folks. And the third production that I got, the first like professional production, was a small company. I technically had producers, but they included me in the raising of the funds and the building of the Kickstarter and all the producing aspects. And that one was the first one I got to direct myself, because the other two productions were actually male directors directing my work, which was, I didn't realize it was another time. It was like 2011.
Oh, it makes a difference?
Yeah. And so when I got to direct my own work and I was like part of the producing team, the product turned out a lot better than the other two plays. And so there felt like there wasn't as much, like I didn't have to do so much emotional labor to convince someone else of something. Everything got like simplified. And so, the audience response to that third one was great. And it really spurred me on to be like, I don't need permission. I don't like, because every time I've gotten permission, it's been a little bit wonky. So then I moved to Chicago to start the Runaways Lab Theater, which is originally, the Runaways was just my moniker for like whatever I wanted to do. And then a company over time emerged, and I was like running that.
That's very cool. What was the name of that play, that first play that you produced? Was it a musical or a play?
It was a play. It was called Those Whom the Gods Love. And it was about a astrophysics, like physicist, like an undergrad student who runs off with her boyfriend that she met on the internet, who happens to be a Malibu trust fund kid. And she is like trying to run away from college. And his downstairs neighbor is Lindsay Lohan's ex-girlfriend who's obsessed with her. And so it's this like, this kind of meditation on becoming, valuable to the world, becoming a celebrity, proving your self-worth through all of this like American kind of iconography. And also what's kind of cool is that like I'm mixed, I'm like half Persian, and we ended up at the time casting another mixed person in that leading role opposite this like blonde, perfect looking like character for this like the Lohan ex. And so it ended up like dealing with a lot of themes that I didn't consciously quite understand until like years later. But it's really awesome looking back at the photos of that production and being like, whoa, like in images, like I can just see so many of my own internal conflicts.
Oh, I love that. So cool.
So I've been in your self-producing theater class before, and you do such a really great job of kind of like the mission and vision when it comes to producing and where you stand as a producer and what's important for you as a producer. So can you describe your philosophy and kind of mission and vision when it comes to wearing that hat?
Awesome question. Well, so for me, it's always about each individual project has its own audience, and how can we set this project up to reach that specific audience ultimately. And that to me, a play can happen anywhere. It can happen in the street. It could happen in a black box. It can happen in a storefront. The play I'm about to produce right now, we've rented a storefront in South Shore, and we're erecting basically a abandoned Black Panther office for this play called Panther Women, an Army for the Liberation, written by one of my best friends. And that's really freaking cool. Like, like we were literally transforming this environment that came to us pretty raw into the world of this play. And so that's, essentially like every play deserves a unique treatment depending on the needs of the play and how it can make the most impact in the world. So I would say that's my current answer of the moment, because these things always keep evolving.
You talked a little bit about what it was like to step into the directing of your own piece and what that meant for you as an artist. Can you talk about other benefits of producing your own work?
Yeah. So I honestly, here's kind of my take, is that most theater in America is self-produced. There's just companies have a moniker that basically represents the people doing it. But a lot of companies start out with a few people taking charge and like wanting to do their own work. And whether they continue to do their own work primarily and become a company like Wooster Group or something, or, you know, they are like Steep, for example, in Chicago, is a company that started around like a group of people who wanted to work together, but has expanded to include lots of different playwrights and lots of different actors. But it all started as some form of self-producing. And so I think that's the biggest, like, you know, it's really easy for playwrights to feel like in order to be a real playwright, you have to be chosen by a group of people. But the truth is they all probably started out exactly where you are. They just decided to choose themselves in some way, you know, and I think a great self-producing organism doesn't ever feel like it's just the one person making everything happen. As you produce, you start to gather like teams of people that you really enjoy working with, and it forms into different kinds of groups. I would say the best equivalent for like the layman speak is like a theater company is like a band, you know, and whether or not there's like new members joining this band or it's just the same people is really up to the band. I can't remember your question, but I wanted to give that framework because that's how I think about it, is like, it's just, that's like how the engine of the theater industry in the US, especially in regional spaces, has been. And I wish that there was more transparency around that.
Yeah. And I love what you say about waiting to be chosen versus choosing yourself as a playwright. That's beautiful. The question was really like, what are the benefits of producing your own work? And you have sort of talked about some of those things, but if you have other things that you would want to say.
I can give, actually, I was just talking to a group of people about this the other day. When I assisted at Playwrights Horizons I was like observing on Kin by Bathsheba Doran. Bathsheba, I remember her talking about how she had her own theater company, and she and like her partner had been producing their stuff for a while, you know, and that was really a beautiful moment for me, realizing, oh, like literally so many people have actually done this before their big, you know, debut somewhere else. Like they because you don't really know what a play is, so you're getting it on its feet and you're watching audience reacting to it. And so the only way to really get better is to write a play and like see it in front of you, like with other people yawning freely and looking at their programs freely and just like being bored at different parts, because then you as the writer have to grapple with the fact that you bored people for a second. You know, and so then your next play will automatically be further along because you know more about the medium you're writing. And this could even if you get a like reading or a workshop in front of audiences and you get the privilege of watching the audience take in your work, that is all super valuable information. But yeah, once you have all the stuff and the tangibles in front of you and actors are playing and they're memorized, there's nothing like, you know, realizing what that does. In my first production, the one that was directed by a man, one of my actors skipped the third act of the entire play, and it was like a one-night only showing. And I was obviously mad at the time, but then I was like, wait, I mean, they did sum it up. Did we even need that act?
Oh gosh.
You know, and that gave me like a lot of like new information, which then as a writer could, you know, make my work better moving into my next show, you know, so that's
very generous.
Yeah.
Generous interpretation.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue into what are the biggest challenges of producing your own work?
I think assessing what scale you're ready for and when. I have this equation, which is depending on how much time you have and how much labor and how much money you feel like you can raise, that equals the scale of what's like appropriate. Because if you try to do something that's too big for too little money, people are going to have a bad time. Like not everyone is going to have a great time. Whereas if you first want to like pull off a solid staged reading and all of your actors are making like $50 and you're feeding them, and like the relationships you've built because that went well will then create more of those values, more of those resources, so that when you do your next thing that's slightly bigger, you've got a bunch of people who already trust you a bit. And so it's more likely that crew is going to catch you when you fall, and that you have encountered smaller versions of these challenges before, taking on bigger ones. And so it's kind of a slow growth paradigm, which in my own way, I did myself as well. When I started Runaways, the first show we did, we ran for like a weekend. I rehearsed it all at my house. And then I got a DIY space or a storefront where me and friends live. And I gave myself like a new challenge per show, but then we would do all the design ourselves. And it wasn't until like a few years later, I started working with a costume designer. And then eventually I moved larger scale and larger budget, and 7 or 8 years in, I was directing like a swashbuckling, like 3-hour epic that had the sort of stagecraft level of an off-Broadway show for not nearly as much money. But, I worked my way up. I didn't just like try and do that overnight.
You talked about budget, and I think this is a question that I hear a lot of people have, like, how do I know how much something's going to cost? And so I don't know if we want to like dig too far into that here, but as we're learning about the administrative and like, how do you approach budgeting and like thinking about paying artists and all of that stuff, are there tips or things that I'm sure there are things you learned along the way. What would you want to share?
I would say doing market research. So looking at other theater companies in your area and getting a sense of what's like the average actor pay, and then figuring out if you can top that. And then what is like, in terms of what space is available for rent and how, and how much it will cost, and like, what are the conditions of renting that space? You want to look into what's available in your region. And if you are interested in like working with independent landlords, like take my class, I'll get more into that. But getting a sense of what people are working for in that region so that you can comfortably not be like below average. Because if you try and produce at a much lower that market rate, the likelihood that you're going to get solid, serious people is much lower. And that, they're probably, if they do say yes to it, they might have a bad time. And usually theater is happening in a world where there are other people doing some kind of events that are similar. If you're producing though in a small town, I would like actually have conversations with your local actors about what they feel would be appropriate. Because some people might want to do it for fun on the side. And so maybe in your small town, they don't necessarily want to be paid, but you'll let the actors consent to what they are willing to work for.
So we kind of talked about this earlier. You had mentioned not needing permission and to choose yourself, and instead of waiting for someone to choose you. Sometimes there are negative assumptions from audience members or maybe other theater makers that you're self-producing. Sometimes people think about that, and with like novels and self-publishing is like, does that really count if you self-publish? What would you say to those people who are thinking that way?
Well, it's funny. I just taught a workshop with a bunch of folks that are boomers and some Gen X, and then like I think one millennial. And like I think there's a generational difference because, when I graduated from college, it was the recession, and the jobs that were available for directors or for, people to choose, all of that was like, it was really, really hard to break into. You didn't necessarily know, what were the pathways until a few years in, and then your friends who are in the pathways would tell you. Hold on, can you remind me of the question? I lost it for a second.
No worries. It's just like, what would you say to those people that are
self-producing?
So
as a millennial in the age of like like I grew up with people building their own empires on YouTube and all of these social media brands. And so as a millennial, it's like, well, obviously you have to like create your own brand and market your own thing. And you got your own like business going. So that's how we see it, as opposed to what I've noticed from older generations, which is the fear of the vanity project. I mean, I would definitely, like, if I were an actor, I would never like star, act, and write. Like, some people can do that, but I feel like when I think of a vanity project, I think of that, and so to thinking about like Gen Z and millennial, like, we don't think that's that weird to like do your own work, because there's such other traditions around us, like the DIY scene in punk and alternative music, where people have house shows and maybe their band plays headlines and they have other bands open for them. There's been a history in the US of people like figuring out how to book their own tours and basically be independent artists for a really long time. So to me, I feel like theater is moving in that direction as well, as opposed to collectives of actors who want to work together forever, staying together and becoming repertory ensembles. That's something that was happening in Russia in like the late 1900s, but like is the working conditions that we're producing under today don't really line up with that being the common way of doing things. Yeah, so that's my answer is like, naturally the market has changed and how we think about it has changed. And because these younger generations don't really have any problem with it whatsoever, I think that stigma will slowly fade away.
Mm-hmm. But I love too, though, the opportunity that creates when you're self-producing, and we're talking about a new generation of theater makers who can also then determine the environment they're working in. Everybody gets paid, we're going to make sure that we take care of everyone. We're not overworking ourselves. Maybe we have 8 weeks or three months of rehearsal before we put this up, or whatever feels healthy. And that's the other thing I think that what you just described so beautifully allows for.
Yeah, because something that I noticed is a lot of my very, very talented playwriting friends would move to Chicago, be all excited about showcasing themselves. And then as soon as they got a few productions, those productions were really disappointing to them because they didn't really have very much control. And the people the companies didn't fully understand this writer's ethos. And it's led to, I've seen it lead to burnout so many times. And because a lot of those people are sold, come to Chicago, there's ensembles, there's all these companies, but there's so many politics with that. There's so many reasons why an ensemble might want to do this play and not that play. And there's a lot of outsourcing of plays as opposed to doing local Chicago playwrights. And so thinking about 13P and that kind of model where there was a bunch of playwrights who grouped together and produced their own work, like, I totally understand the conditions that led to that being absolutely necessary, and I personally am very into people doing one-off projects as opposed to the nonprofit industrial complex, like company model. As someone who's about to leave a 40-year-old storefront theater company, a nonprofit, I don't have a lot of faith in that system, but I do have faith in what we've learned from the indie film world, which is that people can rally behind one idea at a time. And especially if we focus on like, how do we really build a business plan where we can reach this audience? Then, I mean, I would love to be in a world where it's the weekend and there's a bunch of independent shows happening in all these strange places and I can choose between them, much like I would choose between which restaurant I wanted to eat at, So that's where I'm hoping we go, because otherwise this dichotomy between artists versus institutions feels like I don't really know how we're ever going to solve that power dynamic.
Yeah, I want that too. I'll wish it with you.
I feel like Minneapolis will probably figure that out like faster than Chicago, because Chicago just, it's hard for us to escape like that dream that has manifested here. But I'm watching Minneapolis for the
right on. We'll keep on keeping on, as they say. What skills or learning would you recommend playwrights brush up on or study to be able to successfully self-produce? Like if you, first of all, I should say everyone should take your class on self-producing. So don't feel like you have to give all your tips and tricks away. But if you were going to give anybody dangle a couple of things in front of their faces, what might you suggest?
I would definitely suggest reading about marketing and audience building from the perspective of just business in general. There's not a ton of literature written about the business of theater specifically, but so many of those concepts that have been further developed in other fields can be applied to theater. Also, the book, The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer, is a fantastic reworking of how you think about your art and your relationship to audience and your relationship, like, because Amanda Palmer is a singular artist, but she was also in Dresden Dolls, which I would say is, their band or their moniker. But ultimately, when they first started operating, and then eventually after she left her label, they were independent. So they were producing for themselves. They were booking all of their own shows. They were building the relationship they wanted with their audience. I'm teaching a class at DePaul right now where I'm helping my film students think about life in the real world. And this is, I think, the ultimate introductory text to what does it mean to take agency as an artist in this society, and rather than feel like capitalism will completely crush you, figure out how to build your own kinds of businesses within that.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
I know we talked about challenges with self-producing, but what are some things people kind of just forget that self-producing entails, or things that kind of just hit you, like you just hit a wall and you were just super unprepared for it?
So to me, producing essentially is ensuring people show up where they're supposed to be and do what they're supposed to do in within enough time so everybody can do their thing. The thing that I historically always forget is the program. I am very good at hard things, and then on many shows I have done, someone else has remembered the program and thus made a program, so that's kind of embarrassing. But I guess I personally I think I have a mental block against programs because I think they're silly and I just want people to focus on the show. And I want to come up with a different way of crediting everyone besides having their headshots on the wall and besides having a bio, I probably have a little block with that. I would say the amount of cars that are needed, or the fact that things need to be taken from one place to another, that I don't own a car. So that is always, a big pain, is trying to figure out who on the team has a car, who can get what, where, that's why I encourage people to start small, where you're not having to worry about sets and props. You're just doing a staged reading. You're just trying to make sure people show up on time, have done what is expected of them. But those are kind of the two biggest things people forget. Also, I think everyone underestimates how much energy and strategy it takes into filling the run of a show over the course of many weeks. Because opening weekend usually is awesome. And in Chicago, we have this kind of joke where the weekend after opening, all of the actors freak out because they're no one's ever coming to the show ever, which I thought was just me. But then I realized I went to some event where it was all Chicago freelancers, and I was like, oh my God, this is a real thing, because the reviews haven't come out or whatever, but good producers will be hustling to figure out how to remind people in all sorts of ways that the show is happening, and they'll think strategically about who would actually really like this show, and working on how do you approach that person in the way that will work best for them. So those are, I think, the three.
Yeah, the program, that feels like, in my experience, always the thing that's oh shoot. And then the printer doesn't work, and
names are typed there's type. No, yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to have experience in so many things, like the administrative side, the marketing side, the budgeting side, the artistic, all of these different pieces it's quite a lot to sort of track.
It is, but then because I feel like producing is just directing, but there's just more parts to it. Still creating a space, you're still like creating a culture and how we work, and you're still like problem solving and dealing with all of these things. And so again, why I encourage people to start small and build up is because that some of these skills just need a little bit of focus and practice before you add on other things. But at this point, like, I feel like I could, on some level, I can like set up things and have them going like pretty instinctivly, that's, and also I'm pretty good at like going, okay, where are the issues? How can we solve a problem? I'll give an example. Like on this show, Panther Women, I don't live anywhere near our storefront. All of our artists live right around the corner from our storefront. And so one of my biggest fears, also on that show, I am the only like not Black woman basically in the entire team. And so I really didn't want to feel like completely removed and just in charge of the money. Like that felt like a terrible dynamic. And so me and the director and their executive director, who's also an actor in the show, have office hours at my house for 2 hours every week. And I'm also doing the sound design and the lighting, working with the team. So I can't be a nameless, faceless force. I am just like a part of the thing. I get to, talk to the director, when we are just like at my house, just like, getting a sense like, and so that has changed completely the dynamic that was starting out, moving into the project. Because it was, there's a lot of moving parts. And that was a particular project where I had to sign a lease and like hire a contractor to tear down walls and take out trash. And, it's been an adventure, but it feels really good after 2-3 years of not producing at all to be back with this to be back in a producing situation with such a good director who really takes responsibility and is really communicative, and it's really easy to know how to help her. It's a dream.
Do you feel like so you've talked a lot about certain things that you want to make sure you do to be a successful self-producer. And many of them sound like these are things you can learn. Do you feel like there are soft skills that are required? For example, do you need to be an extrovert to be comfortable self-producing?
No, I'm an introvert. I really love socializing with people in situations where I know exactly what I need and how to, and also that I want to understand them and their perspective. So I would say soft skills being like, you have to be, not somebody who blames other people for things and not someone who dwells on mistakes. Those are the two kind of massive things you need to continue to work on if that's like your tendency, because you really have to, rather than go into panic mode, you really have to figure out how to calm yourself and consider your options and make decisive choices. I also encourage folks, and if you take my class, I'll go into this, building a ladder of accountability with the people inside of your team so that every artist has an avenue to reach out to someone if they have an issue and they don't feel like addressing it to that person directly. So how can we build our own homegrown HR to like deal with, problems? And the reason I like started doing this is because as artistic director of a company, and also I'm a writer director, and the company like brought me on, for that purpose, like, because they wanted me to make art and produce for other people. I often have like a shit ton of power in the room. And so I do everything in my power to create avenues that are going to undermine me, because I'm like kind of the anti-auteur. Like, if anything, during the pandemic, I had to remember my own voice, because I tend to like really, really deeply empathize with everyone else and forget myself. And so that's been an interesting balance act, but yeah. And the last thing is like take the best advice I can possibly give anyone who wants to be a producer is that you must take care of yourself before you take care of everyone else. So you have to have developed You have to develop a self-care practice or self-soothing practice, and fill your life with other things you like before you're ready to like show up for other people. And I didn't necessarily learn that in this order. But now, please do that, because it's super easy to sacrifice yourself to pay everybody but yourself for your work. Yeah. And we can't just benevolently create jobs. We also have to create jobs for ourselves.
That's such a great distinction and reminder.
I've definitely had those projects where I'm like scrambling around and like, oh God, did I eat today? Did I give myself water? Did I just bare basics? Not even like, did I pay myself or anything? Like, did I do all the things that I need to live today?
Yes. I feel that I have a daily water bottle now that I drink a certain amount of water because I will be in a much better mood.
Yes.
So you've talked a lot about the relationships that you've built throughout and how important your team is, and how you're also supposed to be building relationships with your community, and whether it's through marketing research, whether it's through building your team, put things on. So what would you say are the types of relationships that you need while self-producing, and how do you build to those?
Oh yeah. Oh wow, that's a big question. Okay, so I will talk very specifically about the Runaways because it is a very concrete situation. I can tell you how I built that, because otherwise this will go really quickly into the realm of abstraction, and I don't know how helpful that is. So the Runaways was based out of, so the Runaways was my theater company, my first one that I founded, and gathered an ensemble of devisers basically, and we created original shows. That operated out of my DIY space, my venue, the Parlor, and the Parlor was basically my day job, which was booking bands, booking poetry, booking art, booking everything. And so when I founded the Parlor in 2013, I created all the social media for it, and we had a big launch party. And through that, I started meeting artists and bringing on people who would regularly book stuff. Any event we did at the Parlor, I would take photos of people and tag them on Facebook, and then they would like the Parlor. And so I built the following in a way where it was half in-person interactions and half online interactions. And so as I started doing, in that first year at the Runaways, I did like 2 shows. By the time we got to show number 3, we were able to do a Kickstarter for like $5,000, no problem. We had sold out pretty much all of those shows. And right after that show, we won Best New Theater Company in the Chicago Reader. And it was because we like did that daily work of doing events, connecting with people, tagging them, bringing the social media in the in-person world, in the community in Chicago where we were, all together so that they could regularly follow it. The one thing that I wish I had done was just build a mailing list. Amanda Palmer, that's how she did it. She did it like, basically she did all of the things I'm talking about, but for a band, but she had this mailing list. The problem with just doing that on Facebook is that Facebook became so sophisticated after a few years that they made it so that I'd have to buy back my entire audience. So if you can start a mailing list and do things of that nature, that is going to build, an audience artist relationship. So that's how it worked for the Runaways. I'd say now my focus is on a lot more film projects, and I specifically tend to gravitate towards stories that involve housing and gentrification on some level. And so I've been working on going to different events where I might meet more people who work in those fields, for obviously deepen my understanding of things, like those fields that are related to gentrification, with politics or real estate development, or agents or brokers, or people who just love their neighborhood. I've been trying to go to different events to connect with those kinds of like-minded people. That's going to help, my understanding of the kinds of stories I want to tell, but also, they have a stake in seeing those kinds of stories happen. And so I've kind of shrunk rather than doing the kind of band thing that I did in my 20s, now I'm looking at my audience is really potential investors, potential people who might want to be, helping to anchor to get these things out to wider audiences, and so depending on where you're at and what your goals are, it's going to look a little bit differently, but ultimately trying to be intentional about what kind of spaces you're going to and who you want to connect with that you don't already know.
Well, I have our last question, and it seems like it might be a fun one. What is your favorite self-producing experience, and what makes it stand out apart from the rest?
Okay, this is in the year 2015. I had two. Like, that was a good year for me. That was a year where I kind of blew up in Chicago, and I saw a lot of fruits of my labor. The first one was I did this production of Faust that performed and rehearsed in a different apartment every night. Yeah. And the whole idea was I had just rented a venue, a more traditional venue, and I lost a bunch of money and I was really jaded. And I was like, oh, I miss the parlor. I miss the days where we could do this for very cheap. And so I reached out to when I announced I was doing this project, I reached out to my parlor audience, and they all hosted us for this show, and it completely sold out, and they got to bring they invited their friends to the show, and it was probably one of the weirdest things that had happened in Chicago in a while, and everyone was talking, and I was the talk of the town in this really cool way. So that was really awesome to see that community come back and show up and really make that experience magical. And then I followed that summer with this show called The Party House, where I rented my friend's house in Pilsen, and we did a reenactment of when I was 20. I lived in this house with all these really interesting people in Pittsburgh, and so I wrote characters all inspired by myself and my friends, and we did this kind of stoner mumblecore dance musical in the parlor, in this house. And my hero at that time, Sean Graney, came and was like, who's this bitch? And I was like, oh my God. And so that was, and the Party House really, I felt was a foreshadowing of my future style as a writer, because before that, I would always refer to myself as just a director. But when I did the Party House, that's the first time I really owned it. I was like, okay, I am a writer director. Yeah, it does turn out better when I write it. Okay.
That's amazing. I wish I could have seen both of those things. That's so crazy.
Well, we have come to the part of the show that I feel like is the most famous and most important. Where does theater begin for you? It can be in this moment. It can be your philosophy for the rest of your life. It can be based off of this conversation. You can go first. We can go first.
I'll go first.
Great.
It begins with an audience and artist exchange. That's it. I feel like if you don't actually love that, then do something else. It's about a writer or any theater artist should really be on the edge of their seat to see what happens with that interaction. Yeah.
I love that. Yes. I loved the story you told about your mother performing for you when you were a kid. And so I also think about my own mother, who used to read to us every night before bed and sing to us. And so for me today, theater begins with mothers bringing their own artistry in and around their children.
Yeah, I love it.
Oh man, Hannah, I don't want to go now. Yeah, for me, theater begins because I was thinking about how you were saying that literally all producing is kind of self-producing, and it's just people that are sitting together like-minded. And I mean, that's the way that the Playwright Center was created. It was a bunch of U of M students that were like, hey, we're not getting picked up. Wouldn't it be cool if we could hear our plays? And then they just kept doing that. And then we're like, let's invite some more playwrights in to have their work read. And now 50 years later, this is what we are now. So I think theater begins when you give yourself permission, like we've been saying, It begins when you let your vision, I'm trying to like find the words, when you let your artistic vision be your permission.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes.
You know what that reminds me of is a theater company I used to idolize really hard was Naked Angels in New York. And in the 90s, obviously, like I was a baby, I wasn't there, but it just seems so cool. I was like, look at these 20 somethings, and there's like some of them are writers and some of them are really cool actors, and they're just like doing stuff. And that reminds me a little bit of, you know, what you said about the Playwright Center. And yeah, that's like, we forget where places start. And so, you know, it's really easy to just like feel like we need to always be at the big places to be real. But it all starts in probably like some church basement.
Yes. Yeah. And as you're talking about so much, I think in this conversation, the freedom that self-producing gives you to bring theater to places that people don't think theater happens. That's exciting to me, as you were saying, Olivia, about what the future could hold. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. And I definitely hope people will hear it and attend your class, because I know there are lots of questions we didn't ask you and lots of practical and guided information that you'll have for people who join. But thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really exciting conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome. And yeah, in the class, if you have an idea for a concrete project, I can also give you advice and help you, give you a little bit more custom support in thinking through those things. Because the class works best if you have something that you want to do. It's way easier to help you.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Thanks for listening to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.